Hello, good evening. I'm Carl Hulse. I'm the chief Washington correspondent for the Times, and pretty exciting night, I would say. You know, for folks like me, this is a combination of Thanksgiving, Christmas, and your wedding night, honestly. That's how everyone is approaching it upstairs.
Hanukkah.
Sorry. I'm with two congressmen, Steve Israel, soon to be ex-congressman who is retiring. This is an unusual election night for Mr. Israel because he has run the Democratic campaign organization the past couple cycles, so usually a lot of nail biting going on. So tonight he's relaxed. I'm also with Congressman Hakeem Jeffries of New York. I'm sure many of you know him and are represented by him. He's a big rising star in Democratic politics. He's actually on the ballot tonight, but I can tell you by virtue of my insider knowledge of that district being really Democratic that I think you're safe in congratulating him on his re-election tonight. Big future in the House for him. So speaking of the future, that's what we're here to talk about a little bit. We're going to talk about what's going to happen after the election, though feel free to throw in a few of your thoughts about what's going on right now. But I'm going to go counterintuitive on you, all right? 100 days. What would Donald Trump's first 100 days be like if he was elected president tonight? What would you foresee?
Armageddon. Apocalypse. Catastrophe.
I think it would be chaotic. I think in the best case scenario, he would endeavor to try to find some common ground around transportation and infrastructure, which is going to be, I think, under either a Hillary Clinton presidency or, God help us all, Donald Trump presidency. Transportation and infrastructure, a major agreement to invest in our bridges, roadways, tunnels is going to have to be the approach that either responsible presidential candidate, soon to be president, would have to take.
Well, he does have a big construction project in mind, and that's the wall. Would he be able to build the wall? Would Congress let him build the wall? How would that go down? Or go up, I guess. Actually.
I think if Donald Trump won, there would be a wall, but it's going to be on the northern border of the United States because the Canadians are going to build it to keep all of us from running up north.
So we have to make some assumptions in talking about this going forward. So let's do the same for Secretary Clinton, who's actually been in the White House previously, been in the Senate. What should she try to do in her first 100 days, and what's realistic?
Well, there's opportunity and there's obstacles. So let's do the obstacles first, because I think it's a good bet that she will be elected president tonight, that the Republicans will retain control of the House of Representatives and the Democrats will have the majority in the Senate. So let's deal with the reality of that configuration. I would rather that the Democrats have control of the House of Representatives, but I think we pick up a net of about 12 to 14 seats.
And so you're seeing that now.
First 100 days, obstacles. Yeah, that's what we're seeing right now. First 100 days obstacles. Look, I think the reality is you're looking at chronic chaos, civil war, an attempted coup on Paul Ryan, and continued instability. Just, typical 100 days in the United States Congress. And here's the problem that the Speaker has. When he ran for Speaker 2 years ago, he lost 9 votes from the Freedom Caucus. Now, tonight, right now, they've got about 247 Republican votes. They're going to be down about 12 to 14. That brings them down to 235. 9 Freedom Caucus members voted against the Speaker 2 years ago. That brings them down to about 225. He needs 218 votes to be Speaker. So the first order of business in the United States Congress, quite bluntly, will be Paul Ryan trying to survive the roll call on January 4th. Opportunity, I agree with Hakeem. I think President-elect Clinton, if I can be presumptuous, I would say infrastructure. I would say immigration, because the Republicans will write their postmortem. They're now doing quadrennial postmortems. Every 4 years, they do a postmortem that says they're losing because they're alienating Latino voters. We have an opportunity to pass comprehensive immigration reform, infrastructure, immigration, and I would add campaign finance reform. Democrats take the Senate. They ought to pass the Disclose Act, open up the system, have transparency, let Republicans in the House of Representatives vote against that.
Congressman, so I've been talking all day to people trying to find out what they think and what's going on, to Democratic Senator Amy Klobuchar, and she says, if the Republicans don't come out of this race and go, we have to do comprehensive immigration reform or we're dead, do you think that that's realistic?
Well, I think, as Steve indicated, there's really a civil war that's taken place, and there's 2 Republican parties. You've got more of the national Republican Party, and I think I would define that as presidential aspirants, people who would like to one day reclaim the White House, and they've been pretty much shut out over the last, it may be 6 out of the last 7 cycles where they've lost the popular vote if they lose it again tonight. And comprehensive immigration reform is obviously something that a national Republican presidential aspirant, and the Senate has passed it. The Senate also would fall into that category. I still think that on the House side, you've got maybe 50% of House Republicans, maybe a little less than that, who might be willing to move forward with some form of comprehensive immigration reform. But you have the other 50%, if not more, who are adamantly against it, who believe that it's amnesty, and who've only been reinforced by the rise of Donald Trump. And the big structural problem that we confront, Carl, as you know, in the House, is that because of the nature of the partisan gerrymandering that took place after the 2010 cycle, you have far too many House Republicans who are more concerned about a primary than a general election. And that's bad for the country because it leads to people being more likely to play to the extreme and less likely to play to the mainstream and the center, which is where the majority of the American people are.
As we call it, it's the also the Vote No, Hope Yes caucus of people who don't want to risk a primary. They know things have to pass, but they won't vote for them.
And let me just add that most of this will be determined by Donald Trump's conduct tonight. And so if Donald Trump decides at the end of this evening or early tomorrow that he's going to take his 42 or 43% of the electorate with him and start a movement, that's going to have major impacts on Republicans. You will not get Republicans to be willing to vote for comprehensive immigration reform when they've lost their moderate members in this election.
Right.
The Freedom Caucus is emboldened. They're afraid of waking up in a primary from the right. I think if Donald Trump decides to continue bad behavior and to create this Trump movement beyond this election, that's going to set a very perilous stage for anything getting done in Congress.
Well, here's the weird conundrum about the House, right? The Republicans are going to lose seats tonight, but become more conservative.
Correct.
So Paul Ryan is going to have to make some really big decisions. Is he going to deal with the Democrats? But here's the question that I think is the biggest one of the night and the next few months. Is there a way to overcome this divide, to do some common compromise bills, or are the Republicans, if they lose tonight, just going to play for 2018 and we're in the state of a permanent campaign? I mean, can this happen?
I think that is the big question, and hopefully we're going to see responsible members of the Republican Party step forward and come to the conclusion that when the campaign ends, it's time to govern. And what we've seen, certainly during the last 8 years, is the continuance of the permanent campaign. And what was most troublesome for me, I wasn't in the House at the time, I was in the state legislature, but in observing what occurred, President Obama gets elected, and either the day he was inaugurated or the day after, there was a meeting between the House Republican leadership, and they concluded that the pathway back to the majority for them was not simply to say no, but to say hell no to President Obama's entire agenda in the midst of 2 wars and the worst economy since the Great Depression. That's incredibly irresponsible. And then on the other side of the Capitol, you had Mitch McConnell say that his top objective under the same scenario, domestic and international turbulence, was to make President Obama a one-term president. Now, the question and the hope—
failed at.
Which he failed at. And so their political objectives failed. They did take the House back, obviously, in 2010. But I think there was so much hatred and vitriol and disrespect and attempted delegitimization directed at the White House that they created an opening for a Donald Trump presidency. And they were probably on their way to a historic crashing and burning. But then, of course, about 10 days ago, James Comey intervened in a very irresponsible fashion, in my view, and in doing so, may have altered the course of the United States Senate and the House of Representatives.
And you agree with that, I think.
Oh, I totally agree. In fact, well, on the Comey question,
Comey.
I think he probably cost the House Democrats at least a handful of seats. You can look at polling before the Comey announcement. There were, in my view, 4 to 6 seats that were trending very strongly to Democrats. Within 48 hours of the first Comey announcement, they were strongly trending back to Republicans. And just to add to what Hakeem has said, in terms of what the Republicans do, is there any opportunity for compromise? All we have is the evidence. There hasn't been a single House Republican who has said publicly, we want to do infrastructure, we want to do campaign finance reform, we want to meet in the middle. The two most visible pronouncements coming from House Republicans are from, one, Jason Chaffetz from Utah, who chairs the Oversight Committee, who said we will have, quote, years and years of investigations of Hillary Clinton, and Mike McCall, the Republican chairman of the Committee on Homeland Security, who said we should impeach her before she's even sworn in.
I mean, he's not usually that far right, would you say, McCall? I mean, compared to some in the Republican.
Well, everything is relative.
But I agree with you, and that's why I'm not optimistic, right? What we're hearing right now is investigate, impeach.
Right.
How do you get past that? I don't see it. What's going to happen? Or is it going to take a crisis?
I think the big hope is that if the national Republicans, led by the presidential aspirants and people in the Senate, step forward and take a look at where the party has drifted and the electoral consequences, when they lose tonight in terms of the White House, fairly confident that that is going to happen, what we'll see is that they will have lost the popular vote in 1992, lost it in 96, lost it again in 2000, although they won electoral college vote that night, won it in 2004, but then lost it again in 2008, lost it again in 2012, lost it again tonight. That is unprecedented in modern American political history. And the growing Democratic electoral lock on the presidency will just become more pronounced because of the extreme nature of the campaign that Donald Trump has run. So the only hope, I think, for us is that those national Republicans, those mainstream Republicans, take the party of Trump away to restore at least the party of Ronald Reagan.
So for these folks, obviously both of you think something to watch right now is what Republicans say in the course of the next 48 hours, correct? I mean, everybody's, how Trump handles it. What does Mitch McConnell say? Ryan's giving a speech tonight, but I think it's before any real results are known. So this is important stuff, right? It sets the tone.
I would watch, number one, what Donald Trump says tonight. Will he
or tomorrow morning
graciously, or is he going to take his movement in his own direction? Then I would take a look at the magnitude of Republican losses. If there are significant losses, I think that changes the trajectory of the Republicans. But I will tell you, long term, fundamentally, my final point on this is Democrats, we took our eye off the ball in 2010, 2012. While Republicans were going out and stealing state houses and winning gubernatorial races, seizing control of the redistricting maps, and locking themselves in for 10 years, we were focused on Capitol Hill. Now, that makes sense on Capitol Hill, but they built themselves a firewall, ladies and gentlemen, and tonight will be a test of that firewall. And if they have decent numbers tonight, and that firewall succeeds, we're going to have to take a page out of their playbook and return to those state and local races, win those state capitals, redistrict in 2022, and build ourselves a 10-year firewall, and get stuff done for the American people.
Do you think that you can actually have an impact?
We're going to have
the president's involved in it. I mean, that to me is...
Everybody's leaning in on this right now.
Yeah, is where the fight has to be. Just looks like we have time for one last thing. Neither of you are in the Senate, though I'm sure that you'll be aspiring to that someday, Congressman. The Supreme Court. I mean, stonewalling Merrick Garland, and now talk of a permanent stonewall if Hillary Clinton is elected and maybe not fill the court. I mean,
Well, the notion of a permanent stonewall is so outrageous and inconsistent with individuals who claim to be strict constructionalists in terms of the Constitution, and the Senate has a clear role that they should consider the nominee put forth by the president and give that person an up or down vote. And if we take the majority back, which I believe we will tonight in terms of the Senate, and the obstruction continues in terms of giving the nominee, either President Obama's nominee or whoever President Clinton may nominate in the next year, then I think the Senate Democrats have to take a look at the so-called nuclear option and allow for a Supreme Court nominee to be considered with an up or down vote and get rid of the filibuster rule in terms of the Supreme Court.
8 is Enough was a silly TV program with Dick Van Patten in the 1980s. It is not how you run a Supreme Court.
I think the nuclear option is probably in order for the Democrats if they're going to do that. And I think that they would move pretty quickly on that. We're right on the zero. How about
Unprecedented for members of Congress.
Thank you. Enjoy tonight, and it'll keep you on the edge of your seats, I think. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
All right, let's do another really quick update. You can see from this map, there's still a lot of uncertainty out there. A couple minutes ago, someone tweeted that the Florida vote count was within 28 votes, the two candidates. So it's, I'd say it couldn't be closer there. There are a couple of Senate races that we know more about. The Republican in Indiana, Todd Young, has defeated Evan Bayh. The New York Times just called that race. So that one goes to the Republican side of the column. And in Illinois, Tammy Duckworth is running ahead, although we're not ready to call that yet. All right, we had one other idea for a question for you all to ask each other one more time. How many of you voted for the candidate of your choice? And how many people voted against the other person? So pick one side or the other and tell your neighbor what you did. Both. That's fine.